The mind game society plays on Yowit. If I told you that nearly every institution you interact with, education, media, corporations, even healthcare, is using documented psychological manipulation techniques to control your behavior, beliefs, and spending, not conspiracy theories. Documented strategies backed by decades of behavioral research. This isn't paranoid thinking. This is hard social psychology. Researchers studying persuasion, compliance, and behavioral economics have mapped the exact mechanisms that governments, advertisers, and corporations use to bypass your rational mind and trigger automatic behaviors. These techniques exploit evolutionary vulnerabilities in your brain shortcuts that helped your ancestors survive, but now make you predictably manipulable. Here's what they don't want you to know. Once you understand these manipulation mechanisms, they lose their power. Your brain can recognize the patterns and override the automatic responses. You can see the puppet strings and cut them. Ancient philosophers warned about societal conditioning and mental enslavement. Modern neuroscience has revealed the precise neural pathways these systems exploit, and more importantly, how to deactivate your susceptibility to them. I'm about to expose 10 sophisticated mind games being played on you daily, plus specific counter techniques to recognize and resist each one. These aren't abstract concepts. These are tactical defenses against documented manipulation strategies that cost you money, autonomy, and mental freedom. Your mind is a battleground. Time to learn the terrain. Body. The 10 TechniQuest Part 1. Scarcity Manipulation Immunity Protocol of Limited Time Offer. And only 3 left. Message you see is weaponized psychology. Marketers create artificial scarcity because your brain's loss aversion circuitry responds more intensely to potential loss than equivalent gain. Neuroscientists studying scarcity have discovered something disturbing. Perceived scarcity activates your amygdala, your fear center, while simultaneously reducing activity in your prefrontal cortex, your rational decision-making region. You become literally less capable of logical evaluation when you believe something is scarce, even when the scarcity is manufactured. This is technique number 1 out of 10. The Scarcity Manipulation Immunity Protocol. Here's your exact defense. For 30 days, implement a mandatory 24-hour waiting period before any purchase prompted by scarcity language. When you encounter limited time, running out, or exclusive offer, set a timer for 24 hours. If you still want it tomorrow, without the urgency messaging, consider purchasing. Document how many must-have items you forget about completely. The mechanism reactivates your prefrontal cortex. By imposing a waiting period, you're allowing your rational systems to recover from amygdala hijacking. Your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex regains control over impulsive limbic responses. You're essentially building a firewall between manipulation and action. Start implementing scarcity timeouts immediately and watch your impulse purchases plummet while your financial autonomy skyrockets. Part 2. Social conformity resistance method. You race surrounded by manufactured consensus. Product reviews are bought. Social media trends are engineered. Experts agree statements are curated. Your brain's conformity circuits are being exploited to make you believe everyone thinks a certain way. Research on social proof reveals that your anterior insula and ventral striatum activate when you conform to group behavior. You literally experience neurochemical rewards for fitting in. This made evolutionary sense when survival depended on tribal belonging. Now it makes you susceptible to manufactured majority opinions. This is technique number 2 out of 10. The social conformity resistance method. Execute this protocol daily for 21 days. Actively seek out minority perspectives on topics where you've assumed consensus. If you believe everyone knows something, deliberately research dissenting views. Spend 10 minutes reading the strongest arguments from the opposition, not to adopt them, but to recognize that consensus is often illusion. Why this works? You're training your brain to question apparent unanimity. Each exposure to legitimate dissent weakens your anterior cingulate cortex's automatic trust in social consensus. Your medial prefrontal cortex learns that majority opinion is data, not truth. You're building immunity to bandwagon manipulation. Start systematically exposing yourself to minority views and watch your vulnerability to manufactured consensus collapse. Part 3. Authority exploitation. Neutralization technique. You're programmed to obey authority figures, doctors, experts, credentials, official-looking uniforms. This programming is so deep that the Milgram experiments show 65% of people will administer potentially lethal shocks simply because an authority figure instructed them. 2. Neuroscientists studying obedience have found that perceived authority reduces activity in your prefrontal cortex while increasing activity in your motor cortex. Your brain literally shifts from thinking to doing when authority speaks. This bypass of critical thinking is systematically exploited by advertisers using white coats, credentials, and official-looking presentations. This is technique number 3 out of 10. The authority exploitation neutralization technique. Your intervention is this. For 45 days, implement automatic skepticism of all authority-based claims. When someone says studies show, experts say, or doctors recommend, reflexively ask 3 questions. Who conducted the study? Who funded it? What's their financial incentive? Research the actual source before accepting authority-backed claims. The mechanism reactivates critical thinking. By systematically questioning authority sources, you're strengthening your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex's oversight function. You're training your brain to evaluate evidence independent of the messenger. You're essentially debugging the authority obedience shortcut. Start interrogating authority-based claims systematically and watch manipulative expertise lose its automatic credibility. Part 4. Emotional hijacking defense. System. Every news story, advertisement, and political message is designed to trigger specific emotions, usually fear or outrage. Because emotional arousal shuts down rational analysis, your amygdala takes over and your prefrontal cortex goes offline. Research on emotional reasoning reveals that strong emotions, particularly fear and anger, reduce blood flow to your prefrontal cortex while increasing activity in your limbic system. You literally become less intelligent when emotionally activated. Media companies understand this and engineer content to keep you in perpetual emotional arousal because it increases engagement and reduces critical thinking. This is technique number 4 out of 10. The emotional hijacking defense system. Here's your practice. Whenever you notice strong emotional reactions to media content, implement the 9-second pause. Step away from the screen. Take 5 deep breaths. Ask yourself, what emotion am I feeling? What behavior is this emotion designed to trigger in me? Only re-engage with the content after your heart rate normalizes. Why this works? You're creating space between emotional trigger and behavioral response. Deep breathing activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which inhibits amygdala activation. Your ventromedial prefrontal cortex regains capacity to evaluate information rather than react to it. You're building emotional immunity. Start pausing during emotional spikes and watch manipulation attempts become transparent instead of compelling. Part 5. Default option exploitation awareness protocol. Choice architecture you encounter from organ donation forms to subscription renewals is engineered to exploit your brain's preference for defaults. You're far more likely to stick with pre-selected options than to make active choices. Behavioral economists have documented that default settings can change behavior by up to 40 percentage points without changing underlying preferences at all. Your brain treats defaults as implicit recommendations and expends significant energy to deviate from them. Companies exploit this by making profit-maximizing options the default. This is technique number 5 out of 10. The default option exploitation awareness protocol. Execute this sequence for the next 60 days. Never accept a default option without conscious evaluation. When signing up for anything, subscriptions, accounts, services, change at least one default setting deliberately, even if you change it back. Force yourself to review every pre-selected box, every auto-renewal, every recommended option. The mechanism builds active choice making. By habitually examining and modifying defaults, you're strengthening your prefrontal cortex's override capacity. Your brain learns to treat defaults as suggestions requiring evaluation, rather than implicit instructions. You're essentially reprogramming your relationship with preset choices. Start rejecting automatic defaults and watch how much money and autonomy you've been surrendering through passive acceptance. Part 6. Reciprocity. Obligation dissolution method. Free samples aren't generosity, they're weaponized reciprocity. When someone gives you something, your brain generates a powerful compulsion to reciprocate. This obligation feeling is so strong it works even when you didn't want the initial gift. Neuroscientists studying reciprocity have found that receiving gifts activates your anterior cingulate cortex, the region that detects social obligations and generates discomfort when obligations are unmet. Marketers exploit this by giving you small, Unsolicited gifts that create neurological pressure to reciprocate with purchases, far exceeding the gift's value. This is technique number 6 out of 10. The reciprocity obligation dissolution method. Your protocol is radical. For 90 days, consciously refuse small freebies specifically designed to trigger reciprocity-free samples. Unsolicited gifts with purchase, complimentary services. When you do accept something free, immediately mentally reframe it. This is a marketing expense they chose to incur. I owe nothing. Say it aloud if necessary. Why this works: you're severing the neural connection between receiving and owing. Each refusal or refrain weakens your anterior cingulate cortex's automatic obligation response. Your brain learns that accepting something doesn't create debt. You're debugging the reciprocity exploit. Start refusing strategic freebies and watch your spending decrease. As manipulated generosity loses its leverage. Part 7. Commitment Consistency Trap Escape. Technique we ensue. Make a small commitment signing a petition, taking a survey. Accepting a sample, you become dramatically more likely to make larger commitments later. This is called the foot in the door technique, and it exploits your brain's drive for self-consistency. Research on commitment and consistency shows that making even tiny public commitments activates your self-concept networks in your medial prefrontal cortex. Your brain then feels cognitive dissonance when you act inconsistently with previous commitments. Salespeople exploit this by securing small initial commitments that make larger purchases feel consistent with your established identity. This is technique number 7 out of 10. The Commitment Consistency Trap Escape Technique. Here's your intervention for 50 days. Track every small commitment you make: surveys, petitions, newsletter sign-ups, trial offers. 2 weeks later, review each one and ask, am I continuing this because I genuinely value it, or because I made an initial commitment? Document instances where minor initial commitments led to unwanted ongoing obligations. The mechanism builds commitment awareness. By tracking the progression from small to large commitments, you're training your metacognitive systems to recognize the foot and door pattern. Your prefrontal cortex learns to evaluate each decision independently, rather than letting initial commitments constrain future choices. You're escaping the consistency trap. Start documenting commitment escalations and watch yourself break free from obligations you never truly chose. Part 8. Information Overload Paralysis. Prevention system. You're drowning in information by design. The overwhelming flood of options, specifications, and reviews isn't accidental, it's a manipulation strategy. When faced with excessive information, your brain experiences choice paralysis and defaults to either inaction or outsourcing the decision to experts. Neuroscientists studying decision fatigue have discovered that your prefrontal cortex has limited metabolic resources. After processing excessive information, it becomes depleted, leading to worse decisions or avoidance of decisions entirely. Retailers exploit this by providing so much information that you either give up or grab whatever is recommended. This is technique number 8 out of 10. The Information Overload Paralysis Prevention System. Execute this practice before any research-heavy decision. Set strict parameters. 15 minutes maximum research time. 3 options maximum to compare. 5 criteria maximum to evaluate. Use a timer. When time expires, decide with available information. Document whether these limited information decisions produce worse outcomes than exhaustive research decisions. Why this works: you're protecting your prefrontal cortex from depletion. By imposing artificial constraints, you force efficient processing of essential information while ignoring manipulative noise. Your orbitofrontal cortex learns to make confident decisions with sufficient, rather than exhaustive information. You're building decision efficiency. Start implementing strict research boundaries and watch decision quality improve, while analysis paralysis vanishes. Part 9. Loss frame. Manipulation detection protocol. Everything is framed as what you'll lose rather than what you'll gain. Don't miss out. Avoid being left behind. Protect yourself from your brain response 3 times more intensely to potential losses than equivalent gains. A phenomenon called loss aversion. Research on prospect theory reveals that your amygdala activates far more strongly for losses than your ventral striatum activates for gains. This asymmetry made evolutionary sense avoiding death was more important than seeking pleasure. Modern marketers exploit this by framing everything as loss avoidance rather than gain seeking. This is technique number 9 out of 10. The loss frame manipulation detection protocol. Your practice is this for 35 days. Whenever you encounter lost frame messaging, immediately reframe it in gain terms. Don't miss this opportunity becomes I could gain this specific benefit. Protect yourself from risks becomes I could achieve this security outcome. Force yourself to translate every lost frame into a gain frame before evaluating. The mechanism neutralizes loss aversion exploitation. By systematically reframing losses as gains, you're training your brain to process both frames equally. Your prefrontal cortex learns to evaluate actual value rather than react to emotional framing. You're essentially equalizing your neural response to gains and losses. Start reframing loss messaging immediately and watch fear-based marketing lose its disproportionate influence. Part 10. Artificial urgency resistance. Method: act now, today only, before it's too late. Every artificially urgent message you encounter is designed to prevent deliberation. Urgency shuts down your prefrontal cortex's ability to evaluate options by triggering time pressure stress responses. Neuroscientists studying decision-making under pressure have found that time constraints increase cortisol levels, which impairs prefrontal function while enhancing limbic reactivity. You literally become more impulsive and less rational under time pressure. Every countdown timer and expiration deadline is exploiting this neurological vulnerability. This is technique number 10 out of 10. The artificial urgency resistance method. Execute this protocol for 40 days. Treat all urgent messaging as automatically suspicious. Implement a reverse rule. The more urgently something is pushed, the longer you wait. Act now means wait 48 hours minimum. Today only means research for 3 days. If the opportunity is genuinely valuable, it will either return or similar opportunities will appear. Why this works: you're reconditioning your stress response to urgency cues. Each time you ignore artificial urgency without negative consequences, you weaken the neural pathways connecting time pressure to impulsive action. Your prefrontal cortex regains authority over time pressure decisions. You're building urgency immunity. Start inverting urgency demands and watch once in a lifetime opportunities reveal themselves as recurring manipulation tactics. Closing these 10 protocols arm paranoid defenses. There evidence-based countermeasures against documented psychological manipulation strategies that corporations, marketers, and institutions deploy against you systematically. Scarcity exploitation, manufactured consensus, authority manipulation, emotional hijacking, default exploitation, reciprocity weapons, commitment traps, information overload, loss frame distortion, artificial urgency. Together, they form a comprehensive immunity system against the most powerful behavioral influence techniques documented in psychology. Ancient philosophers warned about societal control and mental autonomy. Modern social psychology has revealed the exact mechanisms, and neuroscience has shown us how to disable our susceptibility. Science has proven what independent thinkers always suspected. You're swimming in manipulated environments designed to extract compliance, money, and behavioral predictability. But awareness is the antidote. Once you see the techniques, they lose 80% of their power. Once you practice countermeasures, they lose the remaining 20%. Your transformation doesn't start tomorrow or next week. It starts the moment you catch one of these manipulation patterns in action, the moment you notice the scarcity language, the manufactured urgency, the loss framing, and choose not to comply automatically. The version of you that makes decisions based on genuine values rather than engineered impulses. That thinks independently rather than being herded predictably. That controls their attention and resources rather than having them extracted systematically. That version isn't someone you need to become. It's who you naturally are when the manipulation stops working. Implement these protocols with precision. Document what changes. Share what you discover. The more people who develop immunity to these techniques, the less effective they become. Your sovereign mind is waiting. Not someday. Now. The only question is whether you'll recognize the game before it plays you completely.